a mandala, or a form of meditative contemplation and visualization that helps to attune the spirit and the mind and the body to the lunation cycle. There are a set of practices that are associated with the study of the moon mandala that involve the practice of yoga, the practice of pranayama, or deep diaphragmatic breathing. There is the actual study of divination, which will be some of what we also discuss. Suffice it to say, however, that this a string of pearls concept, I know what I wanted to remember to tell you about. A string of pearls is also a reference that comes from a statement which you can actually read from some of that document in a book called Sexual Secrets by Penny Slinger and Nick Douglas. In that book, there's this conversation between the Yellow Emperor. The Yellow Emperor is a metaphor. He's a Chinese king, mythological or real. Really doesn't make as much of a difference as what does he represent. The Yellow Emperor is a mythological expression of the sun, in the same way that they called King Louis the Sun King. This association with the male aspect of divinity and kingship and etc. with the sun is a very old concept. The Yellow Emperor is speaking with three women that are from other accounts that you won't find in this book that I've just referenced to you, are this triple goddess form, this three-fold expression of feminine divinity that is actually one goddess, the great goddess. Some say, Dr. Barbara G. Walker, in her book, The E-King of the Goddess, speaks of the goddess Moye, which is very similar to the goddess Maya of the Hindu tradition. Maya meaning illusion and these sevenfold colors of the rainbow and etc., which are going to become very apparent as we go along in our studies, what their significance is as well. Well, one of these three women, these three forms of the one goddess, each had some things to teach the Yellow Emperor about sacred sexuality. Now, traditionally, we know that the teachings of sacred sexuality were handed from women to men. And of course, they were passed on to women in the traditions of the sacred temple priestess. Some say the sacred temple prostitute. And you know, people speak of prostitution being the oldest profession, but it's interesting to note that it was a profession that was tempered with literacy, the arts and culture, the science of pleasure, the respect for the menstruation cycle, the understanding that that later became devalued, and the virtues of ovulation, of being able to procreate so that men could have more children by women, and in particular they were more interested in their boy children, was not something that existed with this original mindset. A woman's menstrual cycle was as much a part of her sexual identity as bearing and raising children. And in fact, the darker elements of her fantasy life, the absorption with the idea of her own pleasure for its own sake, was something that was a part of this tradition. Also, most notably, the use of it for magic. We are taught in Western tradition, you know, from the Victorian times and, you know, the medieval times and etc., that a woman's sexuality was seen as being something that was imbalanced or considered to be evil. Not so, you know, originally. The idea of sexual pleasure and a woman's sexual autonomy was the rule. And, you know, of course, things changed when certain violent men, I'm not going to say that all men were responsible for the rise we see of patriarchy, but definitely every man in some way has benefited from the positioning that happened with regards to that. Whether they took advantage of it or not was another story. Whether they stood up in the face of it or not was another story. And some of what we see in history that happened to some of the men who defended women's rights were a persecution. Some of them were actually even executed during the Inquisitions, during what other writers have called the 9 million minstrel murders, where women were killed wholesale because they were students of not only these lunar sciences, but their attendant sciences of healing and midwifery. You're talking about a period where men began to take over the medical profession and push out the midwives who were considered to be more folklore healers and etc. In their eyes. There was this down-nosing of a woman's wisdom. But the dark girl, there were 3 girls that spoke to the Yellow Emperor. The dark girl, the elected girl, and the plain girl. The dark girl makes reference to this idea of a period of time that should be observed that was called a stringing of pearls. Is now the time for stringing pearls? Or is it the time for playing horse, which is another reference that we'll discuss at another time. But this stringing of pearls, the idea of it is that every night of the lunation cycle is an experience that has value. And the value of the experience is ascertained in reflection. Each night, people who practice the string of pearls, the practices of our lunar journaling, write down reflections of either their account of what their observance of the yoga or the meditation practices have been, along with their mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical recording of what those states for them are, how they feel. But also just reflections, dreams, etc. It is said that the making of a pearl happens when a foreign substance gets trapped in the flesh of an oyster. It can be either a chip from its shell, or it can be a small granulated piece of sand that agitates this softness of flesh. The oyster is another one of those analogies, as well as the pearl it produces of the moon. The white flesh of the oyster is like a metaphor of the moon. But this agitation of the flesh of the oyster causes it to secrete a substance called nakara in the Arabic, and nakar in the Latin, which literally has reference to the root of the word necro, which means death, a kind of death, and also blackness. And this idea of this black secretion, this mind altering substance, which menstruation is also associated with, as we'll see in our further discussions. This substance coats that foreign substance, coats that foreign object that gets into the flesh of the oyster, and it rolls it around in the flesh until it becomes smooth. And what the end result of it is that it produces, over a period of time, a pearl. It's also been noted that oysters' activity in this regard increases with the waxing of the moon and decreases with the waning of it. And also their opening and closing of their mouths. So more of the details about some of the things that I'm just kind of skimming through here can be read about either on my blog, saywhosaywhat.com, or in my upcoming book, A String of Pearls, the Moon Mandala, and you'll be able to actually look at a little more of an in-depth and more focused view of what some of this discussion is, and how these observations of ancient science and modern science are being brought together in my research for the purpose of providing for people a means of living in harmony with the natural cycles being the lunation cycle, and this we call living the lunar life. And so it's at this point I'm going to close my discussion at this time, and our next discussion we'll talk a little more closely about the actual parts of the moon mandala. We'll define what a moon mandala is, what a mandala itself is, and how we actually use it. So I thank you for checking into my new show, Say Who, Say What. You can find us on Blog Talk Radio at that name, Say Who, Say What. And also these videos you'll be able to find on YouTube, on my page, Say Who, Say What, on YouTube. All right, so again, I thank you for joining me. I hope that this has been an informative introduction to this idea of why the moon, and hopefully it will go much further and into much more depth as time ensues. Thank you. Love and light.